Beneath the fog of war and flags of false glory, secrets festered in shadows untouched by history books. What if the monsters of World War II weren't just on the battlefield, but hidden in locked rooms, whispering in forgotten languages? Open this door carefully. What lies behind it was never meant to see the light. The Ghost Regiment shadows of the Eastern Front. The wind howled across the frozen plains of Calicondan, a whispering gale that carried stories no one dared speak aloud. In the bleak winter of 1943, the Eastern Front had become a frozen graveyard. Soldiers, tanks, and even entire battalions had vanished into the white void. Among them was the Soviet 301st Penal Battalion, a unit composed of ex-convicts, disgraced officers, and political enemies. Official reports declared them lost in action during a desperate charge against a fortified German position near the Don River. But weeks after their supposed annihilation, strange incidents began to surface. German supply convoys exploded mysteriously, snipers struck from nowhere, and bodies were found frozen with looks of terror on their faces. Whispers spread among Wehrmacht troops. The Russians had ghosts in the woods. Major Dieter Koenig, a veteran officer of the 6th Army, dismissed the rumors as foolish superstition. But he could not ignore the chilling regularity with which his outposts were being struck. Always at night, always silent, never leaving a trace. A junior lieutenant, barely 19, claimed to have seen shapes in the snow, black-clad men moving with uncanny speed, their eyes like embers in the darkness. Koenig ordered a patrol to sweep the forest where the latest sabotage occurred. None returned. Unknown to the Germans, the 301st had not perished. They had been written off, abandoned by high command in a suicidal maneuver designed to cleanse the Red Army of undesirables. But instead of dying, they had retreated into the wilderness under the command of Captain Vasily Demchenko, a former NKVD officer sentenced for insubordination. Hardened, enraged, and freed from orders, Demchenko forged his own war, one of vengeance and psychological terror. Operating from a network of underground bunkers built into the snowbanks, the 301st learned to hunt like wolves. They dressed in looted German winter uniforms for camouflage and smeared ash and mud across their faces. Demchenko divided the unit into small cells, each with a radio and a single objective: break the enemy's mind. They targeted isolated camps, stole supplies, cut communication lines, and always left signs of their presence. Strange symbols etched into trees, enemy corpses displayed grotesquely, and German helmets placed atop sticks as warnings. The psychological impact was devastating. German morale plummeted. Field hospitals began treating soldiers with frostbite-induced delusions. Commanders reported rising desertion rates and entire platoons refusing to enter certain forest sectors. The name Ghost Regiment spread like wildfire, becoming a dark talisman whispered around campfires. The Soviet High Command, upon hearing rumors of their existence, tried to re-establish contact. But the 301st refused all communication. They answered only to Demchenko now. A recovered German journal from Oberfeldwebel Franz Kappel offered chilling insight. They are not men. They are frost and shadow. I watched them drag Lieutenant Mauer into the trees. No sound, only the crunch of snow. When we found him, his eyes were open, but his mouth had been sewn shut. How could they do this? They are not men. In February 1943, with the Red Army pressing from the east and German positions collapsing, the Ghost Regiment launched their boldest operation, the silent siege of a forward command bunker near Surovikino. They infiltrated at night, crawling through ventilation shafts and snow tunnels they had dug weeks before. In under 3 hours, 28 German officers were dead, and the bunker went up in flames. The 301st vanished again before dawn. The Soviets, finally recognizing the unit's value, dispatched a special emissary to offer Demchenko a full pardon and formal command under the Red Banner. His response was chilling: "We do not serve flags. We serve the fallen." The emissary never returned. By late spring, the 301st began to dwindle. Harsh weather, skirmishes, and illness took their toll. Some were killed in combat, others simply disappeared into the wilderness. It is believed that by May, fewer than 20 men remained. Still, the myth endured. Even after the liberation of Stalingrad and the retreat of German forces, the Ghost Regiment was spoken of in hushed tones by both sides. After the war, the Soviet archives made no mention of the 301st. Families received letters claiming their loved ones had perished heroically in combat. But decades later, in 1979, a group of hikers near Kalach discovered a sealed logbook buried beneath a collapsed snow shelter. Inside were pages written by Captain Demchenko himself. "History will forget us, but the snow will remember. We were traitors, thieves, cowards. But here, in the dark, we became something else. Let them fear the dark. Let them remember our names not in medals, but in silence." The logbook vanished shortly after being turned over to Soviet authorities. Some believe it resides in a classified archive, others that it was destroyed. But rumors continue, of unmarked graves in the Don Woods, of rusted Soviet helmets fused into the ice, and of ghostly figures seen during heavy storms. In modern Russia, few dare to speak of the 301st. But among certain veterans, when vodka flows and the night is long, the legend of the Ghost Regiment lingers, a tale of revenge, survival, and the price of betrayal. Operation Silken Web, the OSS in the Vatican. Rome, 1944. The Eternal City trembled under the weight of occupation and liberation. German troops had withdrawn only weeks before, leaving behind sabotage, ruined neighborhoods, and a tangled web of collaborators and resistance fighters. But within the marble halls of the Vatican, an entirely different war had played out, one of secrets, subterfuge, and sacred diplomacy. At the heart of it was a covert OSS operation known only to a handful of Allied leaders, Operation Silken Web. The story begins not with generals, but with whispers, encoded messages intercepted by British intelligence in Cairo, suggesting that Axis-aligned couriers were using diplomatic immunity to smuggle microfilm, currency, and intelligence between Nazi Germany and fascist sympathizers in Spain and South America. These messages, routed through Vatican channels, were thought to be untouchable. Vatican City, a neutral state, was protected by international law and the aura of papal sanctity. But the war was reaching a point where even sanctuaries were suspect. Enter Agent Miriam Strauss. 31, born in Brooklyn to Austrian Jewish immigrants, Strauss had been working with the OSS in North Africa decoding Italian ciphers. Her fluency in Latin, German, Italian, and French made her a natural candidate for insertion into Rome. Her cover, Sister Maria Angelica, a newly transferred American nun working in the Vatican's Archives Division. Her mission, identify Axis operatives operating under religious cover and intercept or sabotage the flow of sensitive intelligence. Strauss was smuggled into Vatican City in late March, disguised in full clerical garb, accompanied by a real Dominican sister who had lost her speech during a bombing raid. Once inside, she quickly found the city-state far more politically turbulent than expected. The Vatican's corridors buzzed with whispers of collaboration, appeasement, and silent resistance. High-ranking cardinals maintained ties with both sides of the conflict, playing a dangerous game of neutrality. Information was currency, and silence was the cost of survival. Strauss maintained a low profile, earning trust by copying and translating ancient manuscripts. But at night, she scoured administrative files and intercepted outgoing diplomatic pouches, looking for patterns. She eventually traced a line of correspondence between Cardinal Emilio Carvalho and a Father Gerhardt, an assumed name for an SS intelligence officer posing as a Franciscan monk. Through hidden cameras disguised in incense holders and a series of microdot images smuggled out in communion wafers, Strauss confirmed that Gerhardt was part of a courier ring moving information on Allied troop movements in Italy. The OSS, wary of causing a diplomatic scandal, instructed Strauss not to arrest or expose Gerhardt. Instead, she was to mislead him. Over the next 6 weeks, she fed false intelligence, detailing a fictitious Allied landing north of Genoa, inflated troop numbers in Sicily, and supposed shortages in fuel and artillery. The information was deliberately leaked via Gerhardt's channels. 3 weeks later, German units were spotted relocating defensive positions, chasing ghosts. But the real danger was not the Germans. It was internal. Strauss began noticing inconsistencies in Vatican mail routes, and one night overheard a French priest speaking in near-perfect Russian in the gardens. Digging deeper, she uncovered evidence that Soviet agents had also infiltrated the Vatican, hoping to manipulate papal influence against the Allies in post-war negotiations. The Vatican had become a geopolitical battlefield in miniature. As the operation deepened, Strauss began working closely with Father Aldo Marconi, an Italian Jesuit who had once translated for Pope Pius XII. Unbeknownst to OSS Command, Marconi was not a field agent, but he had his own quiet rebellion. He had been hiding escaped Allied POWs and Jewish refugees in the catacombs beneath the Apostolic Palace. With his help, Strauss expanded her operation, installing listening devices in confessionals and rerouting key correspondence through an abandoned dumbwaiter system used by servants. But with every success came mounting danger. In late May, Cardinal Carvalho confronted Strauss in the cloisters. His words were calm, his smile thin. "You are clever, sister. But cleverness can be a sin without humility." That same night, she found her quarters ransacked, her codes replaced with blank parchment. Someone knew. OSS Command ordered an extraction. The Vatican, already negotiating with Allied diplomats for post-war influence, would not protect her if she were exposed. But Strauss refused. One final transmission had revealed a new courier route, via Vatican diplomatic pouches headed to Lisbon. If she could intercept the next dispatch, it could prove decisive in identifying the broader Axis spy network operating in Spain and Portugal. On the evening of June 12, disguised as a clerical courier, Strauss shadowed a real envoy from the Secretariat of State to the train station. Slipping the man's briefcase from his side as he paused for mass, she replaced the files with doctored documents. But moments later, she was surrounded. Two men in Swiss Guard uniforms, eyes blank, hands on her arms. They did not speak. Instead, they escorted her back to Vatican grounds and deposited her silently at the gates. A message followed: "You have done what you came for. Do not return." Strauss never entered the Vatican again. Operation Silken Web was deemed a success. The Lisbon courier line collapsed days later after the fake intelligence led to an internal Axis investigation. Gerhardt disappeared, rumored to have been assassinated by his own side. After the war, documents released during the Nuremberg trials confirmed much of what Strauss had uncovered, though her name never appeared in official credits. Miriam Strauss returned to the U.S., eventually working for the newly formed CIA. In her private letters, now preserved in a university archive, she wrote of the experience with both pride and sorrow. "In that city of saints and silence, I saw what war truly is. Not just blood and steel, but secrets, masks, and the terrifying quiet between words." To this day, no plaque, no monument, and no official Vatican archive acknowledges the events of Operation Silken Web. But somewhere within the gilded walls of the Holy See, perhaps there remains a whispered memory of the American nun who walked among them, not to pray, but to spy. Steel and Saltwater: The Last Voyage of U-612. The North Sea was dark, churning with salt and secrets, when U-612 slipped from the icy docks of Bergen under moonless skies. It was April 8, 1945, and the Third Reich was weeks from collapse. Berlin was burning, the Allies were closing in from all sides, and the Kriegsmarine was fractured and desperate. Yet one final mission was issued from the highest surviving echelons of Nazi leadership, a silent voyage with no return, and no official record. U-612, a Type 7C U-boat, was a well-worn vessel, its hull patched with scars from earlier engagements in the Atlantic. It had once prowled the Bay of Biscay, sinking Allied cargo ships under the command of Captain Marcus Eberhard, a stern man with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel. But now, Eberhard had a different cargo: 2 sealed iron crates and a sealed envelope marked "For das Vaterland, Geheim." The 27 men aboard were not told what the crates contained. Rumors spread fast among the crew. Some believed they carried Nazi gold from the Reichsbank, others whispered about stolen art, uranium, even the Holy Lance. The truth, as far as the Kriegsmarine records were concerned, did not exist. U-612 had no official orders, no logged destination, and no right to surface in any Axis port. Their mission was part of a covert operation nicknamed Goldener Fjord. Only Eberhard and one other man aboard knew the true objective: deliver the crates to a clandestine rendezvous point near the Swedish island of Gotska Sandön, where a neutral freighter, the Midsummer, would receive the cargo and disappear into the Baltic. Sweden, still neutral, was home to Nazi sympathizers, businessmen, and intelligence networks preparing for a post-war world. The crates were an insurance policy for what was to come, either a Nazi resurgence in exile or bargaining chips for men seeking to trade war crimes for safety. The voyage began under strange conditions. The U-boat's radio was kept permanently off. They received no communications from command. They traveled submerged for nearly 4 days straight, surfacing only once at night for air. Crew morale began to fracture. Seaman Anton Bayer recorded in his diary, "It's as though we're not sailing through water, but through a grave. The men are restless. The sea feels angry." Tensions flared on the 7th day, when a young ensign, Jan Maller, was caught attempting to pry open one of the crates. He was restrained and confined to the torpedo room. Eberhard said nothing to the crew, offering only an icy stare. That same night, the engines faltered, forcing U-612 to surface in open waters near the Skagerrak Strait. As the engineers worked frantically in silence, the sound of distant aircraft could be heard overhead. A British Mosquito reconnaissance plane had spotted them. The U-boat dove just before the bombs hit, but depth charges followed within minutes. The blast damaged the aft ballast tanks and fractured the diesel reserve. U-612 limped eastward, submerged for 18 hours, surviving on battery power alone. The freighter rendezvous was postponed by 48 hours. By now, food was running low, and the stench of sweat, diesel, and fear filled the narrow corridors. Crew members began arguing over superstitions. Some believed the crates were cursed, that they had brought death upon the vessel. Others blamed Maller, who had since fallen into fevered delirium, muttering nonsense about red eyes in the dark and a hand made of gold. On April 14th, U-612 reached Gotska Sandön. The freighter was nowhere in sight. Eberhard waited 12 hours, then 24. On the 3rd day, a storm rolled in, and the sub took refuge in an underwater shelf near the coast. Then came the signal. Morse code tapped in from the freighter, "Come at nightfall. Bring only cargo." The crew was instructed to remain aboard while Eberhard and First Officer Klaus Ritter took the crates to the surface. They never returned. The next morning, the men found the sub's upper hatch unsealed, but there was no sign of the freighter, the cargo, or the officers. Only the empty rowboat, drifting alongside, its oars snapped cleanly in two. Panic set in. Leadership fell to Chief Engineer Otto Wins, who announced they would return to Norway. But the damage from earlier attacks had worsened. The diesel tanks were leaking, the batteries nearly drained. The crew argued over direction, over hierarchy, over fear. 3 nights later, a fire broke out in the radio room. Some claimed sabotage, others claimed madness. 2 men died, and a third jumped into the sea, never to be seen again. The U-boat, low on oxygen, was forced to surface, and immediately spotted by a Swedish coastal patrol. U-612's remaining crew scuttled the vessel before capture, setting the depth charges manually and diving overboard into the freezing Baltic. 6 were pulled from the water by Swedish fishermen. The rest vanished beneath the waves with their ship. The official Swedish report filed in May 1945 listed U-612 as a rogue vessel operating in neutral waters. No mention was made of the freighter. The 6 survivors were interned, questioned, and later extradited to Allied custody. None ever spoke in detail of what happened. One died in a Geneva sanatorium, another in a Warsaw prison. The last, Wilhelm Dross, lived quietly in Argentina until his death in 1983. His final written words, scrawled in the margin of a Spanish newspaper, were, "It was not treasure. It was something worse." In 1994, a Norwegian marine salvage company discovered the wreck of U-612 near the Sandön Shelf. The submarine had broken in 2. No bodies were found, no crates. One curious artifact did surface, a gold medallion etched with a double-headed eagle, marked Reichssicherheitsamt, the seal of Nazi Germany's security services. To this day, theories abound. Some say the cargo was the Reich's reserve gold, others believe it was evidence of war crimes or blackmail against world leaders. More fantastical claims suggest it held esoteric relics or even early nuclear material for a Nazi atomic program. But the true fate of U-612 and its final mission remains sealed beneath layers of steel and saltwater, just another shadow swallowed by the dying days of the Third Reich. Project Ganymede, Nazi Germany's genetic experiment. In the final chaotic year of the Third Reich, as Allied forces closed in from all directions and Berlin braced for collapse, the Nazis intensified not only their war of destruction, but also their pursuit of twisted science. Buried deep in the forests of Lower Silesia, near the Czech border, lay the abandoned ruins of a medical facility that the Allies would later refer to only by its file name, Site 72/Ganymede. When Soviet forces stumbled upon the site in February 1945, they expected an ordinary field hospital or munitions outpost. Instead, they found something far more disturbing: empty observation chambers with reinforced doors, steel restraints bolted to pediatric beds, chalkboards covered in equations mixing biology and eugenics, and an incinerator still warm with ashes. What remained of the staff had fled. But scattered files, preserved serum vials, and damaged film reels revealed glimpses of a secret operation that had no official recognition within the Nazi health ministries. Project Ganymede, named after the mythological youth abducted by Zeus, was the code name for a series of covert experiments conducted under the SS Ahnenerbe, the Nazi research division responsible for pseudo-archaeology and racial theory. Led by SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Albrecht Voss, a former pediatric geneticist turned eugenic zealot, the program aimed to engineer a new, prototype generation of Aryan youth, stronger, faster, emotionally repressed, and unquestioningly obedient. The key difference from earlier eugenics programs was intent. Where Lebensborn sought to cultivate ideal traits through selective breeding, Ganymede sought to forcibly alter them in the living. Children aged 4 to 10, most taken from orphanages, Eastern European ghettos, and political prisoner camps, were subjected to experimental regimens combining hormonal therapy, electroconvulsive conditioning, genetic serum injections, and language restriction. Their growth was meticulously tracked. Their speech, movement, and even dreams were recorded in logs. One of the most chilling discoveries at the site was a soundproofed room with painted stars on the ceiling and a single chair in the center. Wires hung from the ceiling like spider legs. This, investigators believed, was the Stellensal, or room of fixing, where children were kept in isolation and shown hypnotic films designed to reshape their cognitive reflexes. A single phrase was etched into the wall in Latin: Fiat obedientia, non voluntas, let there be obedience, not will. After the war, the Soviets classified the materials, and very little of it reached Western intelligence. But in 1962, during a defection of a former East German biochemist to the British, a copy of Voss's diary surfaced. In it, he described the children not as victims, but as vessels. "We are shaping the clay of a future mankind," he wrote. "Free of weakness, free of empathy. Evolution accelerated by will." Voss vanished in April 1945. The last known photograph of him shows him boarding a military convoy headed toward Austria. His name never appeared on any Nuremberg indictment. Some believe he died in the Alpine retreat, others claim he escaped to South America under a false identity. But the more unsettling question was not what happened to Voss, but what happened to the children. According to an unverified Soviet report declassified in the 1990s, at least 11 of the test subjects were removed from the site weeks before the Red Army arrived. They were transported in medical convoys labeled as advanced tuberculosis cases and rerouted through Bohemia. Their names, if they had any, were replaced by codes G1 through G11. To this day, no verifiable trace of them has been found. The only surviving test subject linked to Project Ganymede was discovered in 1954 in a Polish psychiatric facility under the name Jacob W. He was 30 pounds underweight, mute, and exhibited extraordinary reflex speed and pain tolerance. His iris patterns were found to be asymmetrical, a genetic trait induced in experiments involving selective mutation. When shown photographs of the facility's interior, Jacob began to rock and hum a lullaby later identified as an obscure 19th-century German children's tune about silence and shadows. Jacob died in 1957 of pneumonia. An autopsy revealed abnormal growth in his adrenal glands and scars on his scalp from early-life cranial incisions. His blood showed anomalies in oxygen absorption. British scientists who studied his case speculated that Project Ganymede had succeeded in partially rewriting key hormonal systems in the human body, though at the cost of mental and social cohesion. What emerges from this dark chapter is a terrifying glimpse into the Nazi ambition for generational domination. Not just military conquest, but biological redefinition of the human species. Unlike the broader eugenics policies of sterilization or racial hygiene, Ganymede represented a conscious effort to accelerate evolution by artificial design. The war ended. The Reich fell. But whispers of Ganymede continued. In 1978, a Swedish journalist named Lars Nyström published a book titled Children of Ganymede, in which he claimed that at least 2 former subjects were living in Argentina under assumed identities, protected by remnants of the Odessa network. He cited interviews with locals who described pale, expressionless twins, who could recite books after a single reading and who never, ever cried. The book was dismissed as fiction, until Nyström was killed in a car crash in Sao Paulo under suspicious circumstances. Today, Site 72 remains off-limits to the public. The forest has reclaimed much of the ruins. Wildlife avoids the area. Local villagers call it the place where the trees do not speak. One surviving photograph from a roll of damaged film, recovered from a Soviet archive, shows a row of children in gray tunics standing perfectly still, eyes blank, heads slightly tilted, as though hearing something no one else could. Behind them stands Dr. Voss, smiling faintly. On the wall is a banner. Das Morgen beginnt hier, the morning begins here. Whether Project Ganymede was a horrific footnote of history or the seed of something more enduring remains uncertain. But the questions it raises, about science unmoored from ethics, about the manipulation of innocence, and about the price of engineering perfection, continue to haunt the dim corridors of human memory. Letters from Ember Bay, a Pacific island love and resistance. Ember Bay was not marked on most wartime maps. A small crescent-shaped atoll lost among the outer fringes of Micronesia, it had little strategic value, no airfield, no deep harbor, no industrial base. But in 1944, amid the chaos of the Pacific War, it became the unlikely setting for a love story, a resistance movement, and one of the most quietly courageous acts of defiance the war would never officially record. When the Japanese Empire occupied Ember Bay in early 1942, the island's population of just over 300 villagers was placed under strict surveillance. The garrison consisted of only a dozen soldiers from the Imperial Japanese Army, led by Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamada, a tired, increasingly paranoid officer who saw danger in every whisper. The villagers, mostly subsistence fishermen and coconut farmers, were forced to offer labor, constructing crude coastal defenses and tending to supply caches for the occasional naval patrol. Among them was Rina Machua, a 24-year-old schoolteacher who had once studied for a year in Manila before returning home. Fluent in English and Tagalog as well as her native dialect, she had kept her books buried in jars behind the schoolhouse, banned under the new regime. Quietly, she taught children at night, using drawings in the sand and songs passed down like gospel. In June 1944, during the Allied island-hopping campaign, a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft was hit during a night raid over Truk Lagoon and crash-landed in Ember Bay's western jungle. Only one man survived, Lieutenant James Cartwright, a 26-year-old Navy pilot from Chicago. Badly injured, he dragged himself inland before collapsing near the outskirts of the village. It was Rina who found him, bloodied, unconscious, tangled in ferns and parachute cloth. She hid him in the root cellar beneath her home and nursed him back over 3 weeks. Cartwright, dazed and feverish, remembered little from that period except the voice of a woman singing something that made the pain feel far away. Keeping him hidden was dangerous. The Japanese patrols had begun searching the jungle daily, and Lieutenant Yamada had offered rice to any villager who reported foreign intruders. But Rina told no one, at first. Then, quietly, others began to help. An old fisherman left fish by the well each morning. A boy delivered fresh bandages made from palm bark. The village priest recited extra prayers, knowing one was not for God but for silence. It was Cartwright's presence that sparked something larger. Inspired by his bravery, and emboldened by Japanese neglect, Rena and a small group of villagers formed what they would later call the Tattoo-ru, the Helpers. Their acts of resistance were simple at first: sabotaging rice stores, misdirecting Japanese patrols, whispering false rumors about Allied landings. But then they grew bolder. Coconut oil was poured into gasoline drums. A patrol boat was set adrift. And on one moonless night, they painted the cliffs with a symbol none of the Japanese recognized: a white five-pointed star. The retaliation was swift. Lieutenant Yamada ordered the arrest of 5 villagers, 2 of them children. Rena was among those questioned. 4 hours, she was held beneath the garrison shack, her hands tied behind her, forced to listen as soldiers paced above her. But they had no evidence, and the village's silence held. She was released with bruises and a warning: "Next time, we won't ask." That night, Rena returned to Cartwright's hideout. "We have to do more," she said. Cartwright, still recovering, began drawing maps of the coastline, sketching bunkers, identifying fuel depots and radio equipment locations. With Rena translating, they began transmitting messages using a makeshift signal beacon constructed from broken lanterns and reflective glass. After weeks of silence, they finally received a coded blink in return, from an American submarine operating nearby. The Tattoo-ru prepared for a rendezvous. Under Rena's direction, the villagers created a diversion, setting fire to a Japanese storehouse on the far side of the island. While the garrison rushed to contain it, Cartwright was guided by canoe under darkness to the northern reef, where the USS Barracuda surfaced just long enough to take him aboard. Before he left, he gave Rena a silver pendant from his dog tags and promised, "I'll send someone back." True to his word, 2 months later, Ember Bay was liberated by a Marine reconnaissance unit. The Japanese garrison, already weakened by disease and isolation, surrendered without a shot. The Tattoo-ru members were never officially recognized, and no formal report listed Ember Bay as a site of armed resistance. But the villagers remembered. And so did Cartwright. After the war, he wrote to Rena. At first, the letters were infrequent. Naval mail took months. Then came more regular correspondence. He wrote about cold winters in Illinois, about noisy streetcars and baseball. She wrote about coconut harvests, the rebuilding of the schoolhouse, the children who still sang the secret songs she once used to teach in hiding. In 1948, Cartwright returned to Ember Bay, not in uniform, but in linen and sandals. The villagers greeted him like a brother. He married Rena on the southern cliff where she'd once painted the star. They planted mangroves together along the shoreline. Decades later, a rusted American signal lamp was found buried beneath the roots of a banyan tree, along with fragments of hand-drawn maps, a burned radio coil, and a faded letter. It read, "Asterisk to whoever finds this, remember, the fight wasn't always guns and bombs. Sometimes, it was a teacher with a secret, a pilot with a wound, and a village that chose to believe in something bigger than fear." Asterisk. Today, on the western edge of Ember Bay, there stands a modest stone memorial, placed there by Cartwright and Rena's grandchildren. It bears no grand military emblem, only the outline of a star and the word, Tattoo-ru, helper. Few tourists visit the island. The world largely forgot it. But for those who remember, Ember Bay was not just a dot in the Pacific, it was a testament to the quiet power of love, loyalty, and resistance in the face of empire. The war may have ended, but some chapters were buried instead of closed. Truth was traded for silence, horror for peace. And now, as we peel back the layers, one question lingers: what else have we forgotten, or chosen not to remember?